Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Transformation. I want to start today with a quote from today's guest. The future won't belong to humans or machines, but to those who master the hybrid skill set combining AI literacy and human literacy. I am delighted to welcome Andrea Iorio, specialist in artificial intelligence, digital transformation, leadership, and customer centricity, and also author of the book Between You and AI: Unlock the Power of Human Skills to Thrive in an AI-Driven World, which is actually being published this week. So, congratulations, Andrea, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Susie. Glad to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Andrea, I know you're on this quest to democratize access and understanding to this hybrid skill set, and you have experience in multinational and tech companies. You were the head of Tinder across Latin America for 5 years, chief digital officer at L'Oreal Brazil, and you're also a columnist for MIT Technology Review Brazil, and also yourself a podcaster, and you host the NVIDIA podcast in Brazil. So I know that you're on this quest to define how to navigate this fear vs opportunity narrative of the human potential in a world of AI and how we can navigate it more intentionally. So, I mean, as well as being a black belt in jiu-jitsu, which, as we will discover during the book, is relevant to the mind and mindset and skills necessary for reinvention in an AI world. But if I start with your book, Andrea, your book starts with the metaphor of John Henry and his resistance to the fact that machines could be stronger than men. And we often hear this same old narrative of man vs machine. So, can we start there? What was your personal John Henry moment, if I can put it like that, where you sort of started to realize that the real story might be man with machine?
That's a great way to start off, Susie. And I mean, we all go through this sort of like John Henry's moment. And for who's not familiar with the, story, it's basically the strongest man in the world in the 1800s that was replaced by a mechanical machine, although he didn't want to, of course.
Mm,
And the truth is that I've gone through that in a number of leadership positions. And I think leaders are the ones that are the most exposed to this
yeah,
risk
yeah.
of substitution. And I recall that when I was the chief digital officer at L'Oreal, I
Mm,
recall that the more that I was implementing digital transformation strategies and sort of like digitizing processes
mm,
within or, customer journeys outside, I was noticing that unless I wouldn't change my skill set and the
mm,
way I'd work and my role as a chief digital officer, I would be the one losing my job in a couple of years because,
mm,
after all, the more you go towards digitization and the less you reinvent your job
mm,
description,
mm.
the more you're at risk, right? Because,
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
I think that, the more repetitive the tasks, the more familiar, the more at risk of being substituted. And
Mm,
oftentimes, whenever we sit on a certain chair or like position within any company or even as entrepreneurs, and we notice that we're doing too often the same things, well, that's
mm.
must be an alarm bell that means we are at risk of being substituted. So I think all of us go through these moments,
Yeah.
but we need to use them at our favor as a sort of like ring a bell, to
Mm,
change our skill set.
mm. And I loved the anecdote, the story of John Henry, which I didn't know, so thank you for that. But also his utmost belief in his own beliefs, because I think
Yes.
if I look at what's happening with AI and the need that we all have now to learn, unlearn, and relearn our own formatting, not just chief digital officers, of course, although they're confronted with it more readily. But the idea of this hybrid skill set, of it doesn't have to be binary, one or the other. And your what I like about the book is the hybrid skill set is split into three different parts of the transformation, which for me are akin to the way I define workplace culture. So my definition of culture is the way we think, act, and interact in this environment. And your three transformations are cognitive, behavioral, and emotional. Uh,
Exactly. They are sort of like a mirror of the way you look at culture. And it's so interesting because, they of course work at the individual level, but you expand them at the collective level, namely culture. So it's super interesting. There's
yeah.
similarities.
It is super interesting, and the way you have been able to put them into three different parts in each part of the transformation in terms of skills. But before we go there, which of these three transformations do you see leaders failing at most, and why? And failing is not necessarily negative, as you discuss in your book. So, yeah.
Exactly. I think that leaders, especially on the cognitive level, they fail a lot when it comes again to decision making.
Mm,
After all, anything that stems from any leader within any organization starts from either an idea, a
yep,
decision, a
yep.
thought, and of course, the rest trickles down in interactions or actions, as
Mm,
you correctly said. So, the problem with the first big pillar that I talk about in the book, namely the cognitive transformation, is the fact that we, as humans, still believe that decision making is the old way. You mix instinct with your past successes.
mm,
You kind of like replicate, copy and paste. Has it worked in the past? So, okay, why change it, right? And the big problem is that leaders are the ones most exposed to this risk. Why?
mm.
Exactly because they're leaders and they've had a lot of success in the past. There's this great article by Rasmus.
Hugard.
Yes,
Yes. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Rasmus Hugard. I think it was published 2018 on the Harvard Business Review, and
Mm.
he said ego is the worst enemy of leadership,
Oh,
right?
totally.
Yes. And that's exactly because it plays against our effective decision making.
Mm,
In the world of AI, we are becoming used to seeing things that up until yesterday were impossible.
mm,
Today they're possible.
mm.
And we've never been used as human beings to such an exponential rate of change of things, again, that we have to sort of like not only learn, but to unlearn.
Mm.
And therefore, in the age of AI, the basis of any good decision making, and that's why it is one of the big challenges, is again not only the ability to make good decisions,
Mm.
but to unmake those decisions, right? To unsee your past
Mm.
successes. Because again, otherwise, so we will just replicate or try to replicate the past in a world that is changing. And I
Mm.
think you see that very often too with your customers as well.
Yeah, yeah. And it's counterintuitive, isn't it? Because I think you call it the rear view mirror effect in your book, but we're always looking behind to make our decisions. And like you say, therefore, we don't step out of what we know. And we also step into our biases of confirmation and other things that means that we're right. So we're going to be right.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, we're not right. So, so yeah, I think the whole, I mean, that chapter is split into three parts: prompting, data sense making, and reperception. But the prompting discussion for me is really interesting because it's about asking better questions and asking curious questions, Andrea, which we don't, of course, if we think we know. So, you know, how does asking better questions reshape not just AI interactions, but human thinking and conversations, Andrea? Because if somebody said to me, ask me a better question, my first reaction would probably be, why? Why should I? That's a great question I've just asked you. Why should I ask you a different one?
That's exactly right, Susie. And, taking a segue from the challenge that we've talked about, that is, having this like fixed mindset
Yeah.
and, past beliefs, actually prompting. And again, prompting is interesting because in the technical world, it's mainly related to the ability to craft better inputs to AI.
Mm.
But the truth is that in my book, I expand that and I just say it's not only about asking better questions to AI, but also asking better questions to humans.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
when it
Yeah.
comes to the, because we forget about that, right? We
Yeah,
always
we
talk
do.
about prompting, but then, okay, we're great at asking very well crafted, context rich questions to AI. And then again, we don't do that with our
With our
colleagues, human
colleagues.
colleagues, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny, but I mean, when we get to this connection between the prompting, the expanded version of it, namely asking questions, also better questions to humans, and the ability to break this reperception, is exactly very much connected. Because whenever we are faced with questions that we don't expect, that's when our mind is the most exposed to novelty, right?
Mm.
And so this is a problem in our education. Even I argue in the book that, we've inherited this educational
Of
model
course.
that basically rewards good answers and not necessarily good questions.
Yep.
Oftentimes, even at work, questions are seen as something, unproductive, and, like that person or colleague that, always raises the hand and
Yeah.
questions.
Are they
It's not
difficult?
always very, yeah, not always very well seen, right?
No.
Usually the leader, well, we'll call him or her the boss, because leaders actually should do this better. But the boss, the manager, usually say, no, this is not the moment to talk about that, right? Let me finish talking. That is, stifles any kind of course, creativity, but also this kind of like reperception. That is, again, the ability to unsee our past successes and past decisions. So there is a very direct correlation between cultures that promote questioning and sort of like out of the box questioning, smart questioning, or even thought experiments, as the culture that Zappos with the late Tony Sier, Tony Sier, he would promote with all of these questioning and thought experiments of things that might not even be real in the real world, but would make us think, okay, what would I do if I'd had an infinite budget? Or what would I do if I had zero budget?
Yeah.
That provokes us to think differently. And I think that's super important in the current world, actually.
I think it's super important, and I think it busts the myth in organizations that we don't have time, or let's not waste time on what could be when we know what we think we know what we need to do. And I really like that in your book there's practice ideas at the end of each chapter, and particularly the prompting one. So I did a couple of those, and I asked AI about, what questions should I be asking to challenge my assumptions about how valuable my podcast is? And I'm still thinking on what it said to me. But it was so interesting, Andrea, to see what it had to say. It came up with some great ideas. But reperception is essentially hard for us because it's not the way we're formatted, and the educational system, at least in Europe, doesn't format us like that. So, how do we train our minds, Andrea, to reframe the world faster as AI evolves, because we're never going to catch up with the speed of AI evolution, but do we need to?
We definitely need to, right? And it's at first sight, it's kind of hard actually to work on that because of course we play against some brain wirings that that actually are biologically already sort of like tight and fixed. But the truth is that there's ways to go about it. There's something very interesting that we used to do while at L'Oreal is while oftentimes in big companies and any business, like there is mentoring usually when someone new, someone young, starting off at the company is onboarded, they become mentored by someone, right? And usually it's like the leader and who has the most experience, the most years at the company, knows best the operations and the market. And so we did the opposite. We understood that our leaders had to gain insights from someone who didn't know the beauty industry or the way L'Oreal worked and so on. And so we would do reverse mentoring sessions where we'd have, again, like young, people just fresh out of college, interns, that would mentor our leaders. The leaders would, like leave these sessions energized, understanding how TikTok works and, like downloading new apps and understanding that Gen Zers, for example, value most sustainability and transparency than just, a cheap product. And so I think that's super important. So that's one part to it. And the second one, actually talking about AI tools, they're just great when it comes to helping us, sort of like being our sparring partner in order to be more creative. There's this great study by a team at the MIT that says that actually the way it works is that AI provides us with a bigger number of choices for our decisions and for our brainstormings. And that makes it much wider in a faster time. let's say, for example, we sit down with the team and try to be creative, right? Or try to brainstorm about something new and try to break those barriers, mental barriers, right? At first, though, the first ideas that will come out are always the same ones and not very original nor creative. So it takes time to sort of, and if you prompt well AI and ask it to come up with a number of choices, again, as the MIT team explains, we find it easier to actually reach those outlier ideas that help us break these beliefs. And maybe last but not least is looking at data that shows behavior from our end consumer. Any business, any company, where even in B2B, oftentimes we have these beliefs that stem from, product-centric approaches, right? Okay, we
Yes.
have the best product, our customer will always buy it. But if we don't interpret the data and we don't look at them and try to understand what is data telling me of how my customer uses my product differently, well, I'm never going to update my mindset because I just don't know what's going on out there.
And that's the data sense making discussion, isn't it? I mean, I was bowled over by more than 90% of all the data ever produced by humanity has been generated in the past decade. I had to read it 3 times. I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
And therefore, everybody's in data overload all the time. And if you're also trying to be right and you need to know every bit of that data, then you can't take the requisite step back, can you, to do some sense making in terms of what it's trying to tell you. So I think, AI has that massive processing power, but what it doesn't have is the discernment, and it doesn't understand that data in the way humans do, does it? So can you tell us a little bit more about that and what it means for the behavioral aspect of transformation, Andrea?
That's a great point, and a point that I don't think many people grasp when it comes to a very big difference in the way that AI and humans interpret
Yeah.
data. And this difference, though, is so important, and it actually points to some of the risks that are inherent to
Yes.
AI.
Yeah.
Let's use an example that I make in the book that is, for example, Susie, if you were to have like a giant jigsaw puzzle, with the hundreds of pieces, what would be the way you'd go about as a human being, right, in trying to solve that?
Do you know I hate jigsaw puzzles? I really,
I know
but
they're really hard actually to solve,
yes,
right?
yeah, I
What
would,
would you'd watch, likely the colors, and you try to find
and I
patterns
do the
and
straight
things.
bits first, and then I've got a frame.
Uh-huh, exactly.
Yeah,
Look, it's super interesting because AI does not do that. AI
yeah,
scans the edges,
yeah,
and in real time, in questions of like milliseconds, it actually formulates the probability of one piece actually clicking to the other. It doesn't even look at the pattern, doesn't even look at the colors, doesn't start from the edges. It just, tests and learn, tries, and then sees in milliseconds. And actually, the AI systems at solving jigsaw puzzles have already been proven to be
yes,
better than humans, because
yep.
there's a jigsaw created by a YouTuber that already won against the world champion of jigsaw puzzle. I didn't know there was
Oh,
such a
no.
thing.
Oh yeah, reminds me of the
Super
chess.
smart.
Yeah,
Yes. So the thing is that this leads us to this big difference, which is humans interpret data, information, and signals semantically.
yeah,
They give meaning to it. They understand its purpose. They understand its tweaks. They give also their own perspective to it. Now, AI does this syntactically. It really, breaks down it into tokens, doesn't really know what it means, but it has been trained on such a high volume of data that it is able to simulate the way
yeah,
that humans would solve a jigsaw puzzle or create a text or generate an image. And if we don't understand this difference, we will miss out a very important problem inherent to AI, which is AI doesn't really understand or gives a meaning to
yeah,
its decisions.
yeah.
And that's a problem because it actually has been programmed to optimize the goals by which it has been trained, or that it has been prompted. And whenever we look, let's take it to the extreme, to military applications,
Mm.
while a drone operator, even if it's based out of the US and bombed somewhere in a war zone, feels the weight of pushing that button, which can prevent some incidents, whether they're civilians or not. AI is not able to do that because
No.
it lacks this semantic interpretation of data. It lacks also conscience,
Yeah.
at least that's the
For the
agreement
moment.
across specialists. There's some
Yeah.
outliers there that they say it has conscience, but I think we're still a bit far from that. So, long story short, yes, if humans do not still keep the responsibility to interpret the data and give it meaning, then we're outsourcing something very risky to AI, and I think that's just a big problem.
Yeah. Which is where we talk about augmentation of w working together, but also the adaptability. I mean, it doesn't have adaptive context, does it? It has binary learning, although that binary can be quite powerful. If I look at it's like a pattern recognition machine on steroids, isn't it? It's just it can be very, very insightful, but from a binary starting point.
Yes. There's studies, Susie, that show, actually published on Nature, that show that AI agents, whenever they're, asked to perform a task that has more than 26 steps, they actually, after those 26 to, 30 steps, they start to actually generate bad outcomes.
Ah,
Why?
okay.
Because they don't have the ability to really think long term and to adapt to changes while they're performing these tasks.
Mm,
And this is something that humans do. They navigate in uncertainty, they're able to adapt. And so the point is, AI is great at performing tasks in the short run, right?
mm,
Performing things in predictable environments, also because they're able to perform tasks based on training on data that are from familiar tasks.
mm,
Like in
mm,
an unpredictable scenario, we don't have data, so we cannot train AI to actually navigate those scenarios.
mm.
So it's something that we also have to be very careful at whenever we look at, okay, within our company, what are the tasks that we outsource to AI? It's very important that we understand the degree of familiarity that we
Mm,
have of those, around those tasks. Because if we ask AI to navigate uncertain environments or to perform uncertain tasks,
mm.
that's where we can have bad outcomes. And again, it leads to hallucinations. It
Yeah.
leads to generalization problems. It can lead to transparency problems, which is, okay, AI is performing a task, but we don't really understand how it came to that conclusion, which,
Mm.
is also a very big problem. So, hallucinations actually come out of the fact that AI prefers to give us an answer because, again, it works syntactically and not semantically,
Yep.
rather than just tells us, look, there's no bibliographical reference for this thing that you'd ask me. And while instead it prefers to generate a reference, and then consultancy teams such as not mentioning names, but mentioning them, Deloitte
Yes.
provides a full report to the Australian government, and then the Australian government notices that there's many AI hallucinations and asks for its money back, and it was like $300,000. So that's a big
Mm,
problem. And
mm.
already touching upon this means that that humans must be educated to recognize what is
Yes.
an hallucination or not. But eventually, it's all related to this inability to navigate the unpredictable, this sort of like this unpredictable world.
Yeah, and in a way, it leads me to the fact that therefore it's not going to fail very much, is it? So the whole idea around failure and smart failures, and it was really interesting. I hadn't thought about the fact that AI boosts the need for failure. So if I look at, learning cultures in an organization and how a lot of work cultures today views failure, whatever is written on the wall, fail fast, da, 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 we know that it isn't in our human DNA for the moment to go, oh, yeah, I failed and that's fine, and here's what I learned from it. So I think that's really, really important in this hybrid skills set. It's something that stayed with me from your book is we need to fail more through smart failures. And
Exactly.
yeah.
And AI helps us to doing that, because for the book, I've borrowed this, theory of
Yes.
mistakes from Amy Edmondson.
Yeah, intelligent failure.
Amazing. Yes, she's an amazing, professor at Harvard Business School, and she has this theory that not all mistakes are bad. And so, whenever I studied more in depth the way she'd go about it, I understood. Okay, she's saying that there's a type of mistakes that are actually good. Why? Because the value of the learning you get through them is higher than the cost.
Yeah.
And I understood then, okay, so AI does exactly that. AI helps us extract meaning from data. So whenever we are able to measure what worked and what didn't work, we're able to increase the value of learning. And at the same time, through automation, is able to decrease the cost of experimentation. So long story short, I understand, okay, so AI is exactly what is able to do something that, of course, on the one side is promote and make more mistakes smart, as I call them. But at the same time, it helps us minimize the other mistakes, which usually are 99% of the remainder volume, which is the avoidable, the unavoidable, and basically that we minimize through planning, through automation, through predictive maintenance, and so on. And so, okay, and then that's getting to your point is, okay, so if AI is able to minimize all the unnecessary mistakes,
Yep.
to maximize the learning through smart mistakes, it means that we as human beings, whenever we automate our tasks, right? There's, according to a study by Accenture, depends, of course, on the sector you're in, but on average, actually, like 35 to 45% of our tasks can be automated by AI. So imagine having 35% of your time back, right? That's where you'd have to spend more time experimenting more, failing more, almost as a scientist that
Yes.
will never discover anything without allowing himself or herself to fail. Well, now we think the exactly opposite way in organizations. We think that we're better if we never fail, but how will we ever discover anything new or innovate or reinvent our business that way? So I think AI comes in as a great tool to do that.
Yeah, and I think, it brings me to the more emotional layer of the transformation around how we feel about that and what it means to feel, in inverted commas, in the world of AI,
Yes.
because, you know, emotional skills are trainable, but AI's empathy is, as you say in your book, code, not consciousness. So
Yes.
what does that mean for leadership? And if we're talking about hybrid skill sets, Andrea, what are we bringing to that as human beings? Because I think it's incredibly interesting, the emotional regulation that we can have around the subject of failure and what that can bring to a world of AI.
That's super interesting because you've pointed to something in the book that, again, whenever we look at empathy, for example, as a skill, the tricky part of AI is that it is great at faking it, right? It
Yeah,
can simulate empathy
it's
so
very
well.
believable.
It's super believable, right? It's even hard, to recognize whenever it's like a AI chatbot and so on. But there's a problem. Whenever people know it's AI, especially when you try to fake it, right? And so you develop a super empathetic AI, whenever they know it's AI, it creates what specialists call the uncanny valley effect,
Yeah.
which is this sort of like rejection. It generated backlash in some, apps that were doing online therapy. And they, without, of course, transparency, they rolled out a ChatGPT responding on behalf of the therapists. And when people discovered, although they liked the experience, it backlashed. And this actually is because there's a major difference. While AI is great at providing empathy to you, it doesn't feel back, while humans feel back. And so this is super important because it activates the reciprocation mechanism, right? I like this example of, imagine going out, in the street, outside of your home, and there's someone coming towards your direction, and you don't know this person, but what's the only thing that you can do that makes sure this person is going to smile at you? What's the thing?
Smile at them.
Exactly. And that's the thing that leaders forget all the time. That is, I want my people to fail more,
Mm,
but I cannot show failure because I'm the leader. And so
mm,
we start these meetings where supposedly these like, and I see that all the time. They're like, okay, so I want to fail more, then I'll do this sort of like, there's even, they call it the fuck up nights. I don't know
yeah.
if
Yeah. Yeah.
there's, yeah, in Europe, I'm sure there's some.
Yes,
And
there are. Yeah.
yeah, and they simulate these meetings, right? And then the leader is like, okay, you first start off. What was your biggest failure this month? And this meeting is not really empathetic because, well, I mean, I'm starting first and I'm being judged by my leader that never admits any mistake. But imagine this meeting starting the other way around. The leader starts off and says, okay, I'll start off recounting my biggest mistake this month.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
makes a whole lot of difference because you are providing the example and you're making metaphorically the
Mm,
other people smile because you smiled first. And that's something that is very hard with AI because although it simulates empathy, there will always be at some point, maybe not in the first interaction, maybe not in the second, but at some point, the uncanny valley effect playing against it.
mm,
And that's why this is definitely a challenge, and we have to always blend touch points either with
mm.
our employees or with our customer, partner, or whomever. Blend the efficiency and quick response by AI and all the information available to the empathetical cut point where
Mm.
humans get into the loop and supervise and compliment and so on.
And it brings me to the complexity almost of the human discernment process and I mean, you talk a lot about this subject in your book, trust. But I'm going to hone in here on the trust in AI. So building a culture of trust in AI. And you say that you need user training that can bridge the gap between AI's power and human confidence.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because upskilling is such a massive cost and subject for everyone at the moment that I think you can upskill in the same way that you can teach emotional intelligence, i.e., tick, 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 and you walk out of there and you're not confident, you don't trust it, and you don't know what to do with it.
That's exactly the point, and the reason why most of these trainings fail.
Mm,
Because there's a study that actually shows that we are more as humans. We have a bigger propensity to collaborate with AI if two sort of like dimensions are met.
mm-hmm,
One, they call it the cognitive dimension, and one, they call it the emotional dimension. What's the cognitive dimension? If we understand how the tool works, if we know how to prompt it well, if we, understand the logic behind it, and that's where most of the trainings are about, right?
mm-hmm,
They're about teaching you how to use the skill. I understand, because of course, if these trainings were not even in place, as in some cases, right, it would be even harder to collaborate with AI.
yes,
But
of
let's say
course.
this, first step is
Mm,
sort of like check. That's where the
mm,
bulk of trainings are. But then they forget about the emotional aspect of collaborating with AI. Do I feel reassured by AI or
mm,
do I feel scared of it?
mm,
Or do I feel it complements me or do I feel it substitutes me? And the emotional part is tricky because it's not that you can really train it, but you can definitely create again an environment for it.
mm,
And so let's start from one extreme. That is, because there's a whole spectrum here.
of
There's
course.
one extreme of companies that say, look, I'm AI first now. You should use the tool, and it's welcome and so on. This is good, but there's a risk which is over dependence.
Mm,
And
mm, mm,
this is something, people rely too much upon it. But again, whenever, there's this sort of like leadership endorsement of the tool, the emotional perception feels better. And
mm,
also the way the tools are designed. Because, I mean, if I, for example, implement an AI tool that takes orders instead of like a human, salespeople will be scared because
mm,
taking orders for them is 30% of their time, and they will be like, well, I'll be less relevant. But if the manager that rolls out the tool explains that, okay, but then with these 30% of the time, you should then sit down with the end customer, talk more, you can listen more. Like, we value for that. And we're like, because you just roll out the tool and they'll be like, okay, but then what's my value?
Yeah.
That's one of the extreme. The other extreme is, of course, no. Like, if you're caught with AI, well, there's less and less of that, but still, like, if you're caught with AI, or, like, oh, it's super sensitive and privacy, but they don't provide also alternatives, which is a small language model, or, they just, you cannot use ChatGPT because you're putting sensitive information of the company. Yeah, but okay, then what's my alternative? Because I'm being less productive then at this point, because I'm competing with other colleagues or companies that use AI. So that's also a big problem. Like, if we don't use AI in one way or another, we're like becoming less productive. We're not staying equal because we're comparing ourselves with like much more productive teams. So I think the emotional component of it is super important, because it leads to trust in the tool, and trust leads to collaboration. Trust is the big lubricant for collaboration. So that's the logic around it. And so, I think it's funny how it revolves around the leadership role and how you sort of like message it. Even communication is important at this point.
Always. And, leadership has so much to answer for in transformation and reinvention, particularly in organizations. And this is why I really, really love the fact that the third part of the emotional transformation was agency, because I think everybody has agency in any system they live and work in, however big or small they think that is. But everybody always has this choice. And often I hear, "Oh, I'm not allowed to do that where I work," or, "Oh no, the system won't let me." And my reply to that is always, you always have agency to do something, even if it's just to say you don't agree with that. And I think in an AI world, Andrea, agency is even more important, individual and collective, human agency, I mean.
Totally, Susie, because as you've said, we tend to, whenever we don't agree with a decision or whenever we don't have familiarity, to outsource responsibility, right? We say, no, okay, this, my boss made this decision, so I'm not really responsible for that. And the risk with AI is doing the same. But as we outsource to AI more and more decisions, we cannot forget that if we still, if we use the tool, we're still responsible for it. Why? Because AI is not deemed responsible, neither legally, neither morally, neither technically. So, there was this case of a famous accident with an autonomous car that was, being tested by Uber. And, it ran over a cyclist because it mistakenly identified it as a faster moving object, but it was a cyclist that was not cycling. It was like, carrying the bike by hand, and was going much slower than the car identified. Long story short, Uber was not deemed responsible for the death. Even like, of course, the AI software developer is not deemed responsible in court. The only one responsible was the training driver, the human person that was within the car and should have actionated the brake, and didn't do that on time. So long story short, we still carry the responsibility. And whenever we outsource more and more important decisions to AI, that's a risk, because the responsibility that we carry is bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And again, it's funny because sometimes we think, okay, I'm a bank, I'll start outsourcing to AI through an algorithm, whether I'll approve or not a loan to my customer. So it's great. I'm not taking responsibility for that, right? And the bank manager supposedly is just, happy about it. Problem is, you'll have AI denying a loan to a customer. The customer will get angry to the agents, in the physical agency, looking for the manager and asking, why was I not approved? And the manager will not be able to answer. That is the biggest breach of trust and the biggest, lack of responsibility that there might be. And so if we don't think about these consequences, then we'll have Totally, like, and like it's what my fellow Italian researcher and AI expert Luciano Floridi calls it the many hands problem. There's, opaque
Yeah,
responsibilization, pointing of fingers, and nobody really understanding who was responsible for that decision. And
yeah.
that's a risk the more we outsource decisions to AI.
Which is a risk, but it's also, I mean, if I look at any of these major changes, societal changes, of which AI is one massive one, the biggest one since the internet, and there's a massive shift in our identity. So it's
Yes.
almost like a collective crisis. If I fast forward to 2030, Andrea, what do you think will be the most successful hybrid leader? What would they look like, sound like, feel like to work with?
Look, what I think is that it will be a leader that becomes a curator of his or her own workflow
Hmm.
and very well understands what are their responsibilities, what are the tasks they'll have to perform, and do a couple of things. The first is, what are the decisions and tasks that I'm going to be able to automate?
Mm,
And that's one part of it. So that's where you want to be more efficient, you want to be
mm,
faster, you
mm,
want to be more assertive. The second big bulk will be, okay, so what do I augment? Instead of, automating and
mm,
substituting, what are the decisions and tasks that I actually want to use AI to improve the quality of, right? And so it could be like either, I'm a creative and I'm going to use, I don't know, AI to generate a much broader, options of images
mm,
for an advertisement that I'm doing, something that I wouldn't be able to do right now. I cannot scale that much.
mm.
And the third thing is what I do with the time that I gain back. So I think that,
Yeah.
and that's where the human
Mm,
people management side, the sort of like a culture building part gets in, which is leaders don't have the time to do that right now. But if they have to be honest, and that's something I do, well, not only in the book, but also sometimes in the keynotes, which is I ask them to think, when was the last time they did something for the first time? It's funny because you see these like blank stares and, like people trying to go back in time and
mm,
they don't remember that.
mm.
And, we, like modern day Sisyphus, we're doomed at doing
Yeah,
all
I
of these
liked that.
repetitive
Yeah.
tasks.
Yeah.
And it's funny because those are exactly the ones that, first of all, AI can take the weight out off of our shoulders.
Mm,
That's one part of it. But the second one is that we don't have then the time to do what humans should do best. Because if I had to sum up basically what my book and my work is about, and what I think that any leader and any company should better understand is, what is it that AI does best now?
mm,
And as a consequence of that, what is it that humans should do better?
mm,
And it's funny because we understand what AI does best. We understand that does very well things that we do well as well. So what should then we do? Should we
mm,
fight it off, compete? Like we don't really understand. And so sometimes we overlap. We're not smart. We're not being efficient. And I think the leader of the future is very clear about what do I automatize, what do I augment, and
mm,
what do I do with the time I save. And then that's exactly where it becomes more human.
mm. And if you had one final call to action, Andrea, for leaders and change makers listening to this, because I know your book is both a call to action and a professional guide for leaders who want to have confidence in the
Yes.
hybrid, so both in them, in humans themselves, therefore, and also in AI. What would your call to action be to them? What could they do tomorrow?
I think the first thing that they should understand, I believe, is that it's not that AI is coming to substitute humans. It's humans that use well and smartly AI are coming for the humans who don't.
Mm.
And that brings a final message, which is how can we be more smart about it? First of all, we need to really understand again, what is it of my job description that I should keep, what I should change, what is it of my teams as well, and be smart at saying, okay, so this is where AI fits in, and this is where it doesn't. Because we shouldn't just, think we can outsource everything, or just that we should automate everything and then just, lay back and just wait for things to come and don't do anything with the time that we gain back. So I think really that is really important for leaders. And so how do we do that? Okay, it sounds counterintuitive, but you don't learn that on books. Although I'm promoting my own book, it can work as an inspiration, but you're not going to be able to do that. You have to start and learn by doing. I like the analogy of how you teach a child to crawl, right?
Yes.
You do two things. You put them in an uncomfortable spot, right? You put them, belly down. They're super comfortable, belly up, but you do tummy time 5, 10, 15 minutes per day. And then that's how they develop the backbone that allows them to crawl. So we have to put ourselves out of the comfort zone, because in the comfort zone, that's exactly where we'll be replaced, because we're always doing the same things, the things we know, and the things that AI knows best because we know them so well. We have so much data. AI, again, is poised to overcome us. The second thing you need to do with kids is you have to create an incentive, right? You have to, put toys around, and I'm not talking about financial incentives here to use AI or be smart about it. I'm talking about the sense of urgency. If we don't understand that we are at a unique time in history where, for the first time, there's a technology that is much smarter than us. Secondly, we're a technology that we don't fully understand. And third, a technology that is coming for not so much our jobs, but many of our tasks. If we don't understand that there's something to do right now, we're missing the train. We're missing the train. Like the train will pass. We're really at risk of being substituted. And so I think it comes through practice, to the small actions, to testing and understanding what works, what doesn't. Again, using the analogy of a scientist, we all should become ones in the age of AI.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I'm going to leave our listeners with the idea of becoming a scientist and experimenting with where they need to grow more muscle and where they need to become more literate, whether it's AI, human, or both. Andrea, thank you so much for coming and sharing your research, your book, your insights, your stories. Where can people find out more about you and what you do?
First of all, Susie, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. I think you really got into depth of the book, and so this is really it made the conversation very interesting. So thanks for that.
You're welcome. It
So
was a
if
pleasure.
people want to reach out, they can find me on my website, www.andreaiorio.com. And also on LinkedIn, Andrea Iorio. And also they can find out more about the book on its website. It's betweenyouand.ai. So people can reach out there. Will be amazing to hear what they thought about this discussion. And thanks again for hosting me.
It's a pleasure. Okay, and please do tell us what you think of this discussion and get in touch with Andrea either on his website or on LinkedIn. Thanks, Andrea, for a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Susie.
Thanks.